there are multiple stressors and influencers that could cause stress in the workplace. This podcast is an accumulation of several blogs that discuss the topic of health and wellness in the workplace. Listen as Kimberly Kaler discusses ways one can combat workplace stress and take care of one's own corporate mindfulness. Let's begin the podcast.
Welcome everyone to the podcast. I'm Janice Kleins, Marketing Manager for AOE, and today we are discussing health and wellness in the corporate world. Today I have with me Kimberly Kaler, AOE President. She's written several blogs, hosted many webinars on the topic of health and wellness in the corporate environment, micromanaging, all that kind of stuff. And she's currently spearheading our Working Genius information. So there's lots of information. So welcome, Kimberly, to the podcast.
Thanks, Janice. This is a topic I love to talk about, so I'm excited.
Great. So just to start, can you kind of give us a little bit about your background in this? I know you teach yoga. Just tell our audience a little bit about that part of your background that they may not know about.
Sure. So I refer to it usually as my side hustle. It's my side passion is teaching yoga, corporate wellness, other types of meditation and mindfulness. And at first that may seem like it's totally different than running a consulting firm that specializes in organizational excellence. But the two actually are married very, very nicely and dependent upon one another, because I really believe that wellness, family and work-life balance, just finding balance in your own lives is really key to you being a happier and more productive worker as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So let's jump right in and let's discuss a blog that you wrote called Mastering Micromanaging. So in your blog, you mentioned a couple of the following stats. 84% of American workers say they could do their manager's job. 83% of American workers said they could do their own job without their manager. 82% of American workers said they can work potentially, or that they would potentially quit their job because of a bad manager. So tell our audience how this relates to micromanaging.
Well, when I saw those statistics, there were a couple of things that really jumped out to me. If we take that last one, that 82% of American workers say they would potentially quit their job because of a bad manager, I'm reminded of what a client's wife had actually said to me at one point. We were at a business dinner, and she pointed out that people don't leave usually because of the company or the work. They typically leave because of their boss. Now, I know there's exceptions to that, but that environment. And so I think it is really key. And we saw a focus coming out of the pandemic as well, of just having work-life balance and understanding, the role that you play in an organization. And micromanaging plays into that in terms of, hopefully whoever you report to, the team that you work with, everybody has defined roles, and we don't need to be babysat if we're in a very healthy environment. One of the other things that jumps out at me here is that 83% of workers say they could do their job without their managers, or they could do their manager's job. That's something that you actually, should hope for at a certain extent. Like, I want my team members to be able to do things. I want them to see that I will pick up and roll up my sleeves and do whatever I'm asking them to do as well. There shouldn't be some secret sauce. I mean, yes, managers and those that move up into different leadership positions may have some skills and expertise that they've developed over time. But the more we can get rid of that hierarchy, and we're all just working towards that same culture, that same vision, those same objectives, we're just going to have a healthier environment. We're going to produce more, and we're going to be happier at work together.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think I've been told, the secret, a successful manager is one that can manage without being there. Their team just does it. So I agree with what you're saying there. So in your blog, you mentioned the lack of trust is one of the most common signs of micromanagement. But you believe it's the inability to delegate as being the bigger challenge. Can you elaborate on this for us?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of team members struggle just to learn how to delegate. So as we move somebody up in an organization, it's a skill you need to actually learn. Part of it is just their own mental struggle with letting go of things and how is it going to be done? Is it going to be done right? They're also, responsible for that work the other person's doing. So that's a thing that they need to learn how to make peace with and how to handle. But then it's also a matter of just truly learning how to delegate. We ask ourselves those kind of questions of like, well, it's going to take me longer to explain than just to do it myself. But we need to get into the art of actually doing that so that we can grow organizations, we can grow other team members, and it also frees you up to be able to do other things. So I think that lack of ability to delegate really does fall in micromanaging. And then we just have all these hierarchies and these layers of micromanagement, and team members get frustrated because they're not able to grow. And then other team members, if they're not good at learning to let go and have other people do things, it also keeps them stuck in their role. They're not able to grow as well. And everything I said is truly a skill to learn how to do this. I've got a couple of team members right now that it's one of the things that we're working on is how to let go, how to, ask yourself, do I really need to do this? Or would this be a great project for somebody else in terms of building their skill set?
No, I think that's great. So just talking about that, why is delegating so hard? And can using the working genius model help?
Working Genius model can definitely help. So, for those of you that haven't listened to any of our Working Genius podcasts yet, I invite you to jump right over there. But it's a work productivity assessment tool. It doesn't identify, your strengths and weaknesses like other personality tests. It identifies and helps you understand where you have joy in the work you do, and then maybe what exhausts you or isn't as good of a fit or really wears you out. The Working Genius model will help you understand, especially related to micromanaging, what your work style is. So, do you like to go into a hole and do everything on your own? Are you that team player that really wants to be called an enabler, that wants to be involved and engaged with the other team members at all times? Are you the big picture person in ideas? So understanding all of those things also helps you figure out when to delegate, where to delegate, maybe where you need to bring people in. And we shouldn't think of delegating just in terms of tasks. Delegating may also mean asking for help related to decisions. That sounds silly, but I have an example a couple of weeks ago where one of our team members who's really high on wonder and invention. So the big picture, the ideas, and then funneling it down a bit. But she gets a little stuck when it comes to discernment, when it comes to then activating to making the decisions in terms of how to move forward. And so she asked for help. That's a form of delegation. She asked for help and said, "Hey, I'm stuck right here. Can you somebody help me out with this next phase of work?"
No, that's really, it sounds like this working genius, which I've used, you've introduced it to us. It really does help not only the employees, but also the managers figure out how their employees, their work style is. So if anybody in our audience is interested in getting a working genius assessment, Kimberly is certified to do this for your organization. I highly recommend it. So that leads me into my last question on micromanaging. Tell us how growth happens in the workplace.
I believe growth happens in the workplace in a very deliberate manner in terms of setting goals and objectives. I've always had the philosophy that I hire good people. Obviously, you have lists of tasks and activities and jobs and roles that need to be filled. But if you hire good people, somehow things tend to work out if you're able to then outline and match what that person is good at with what the organization needs. It's of course not always perfect like that, but growth happens when you can sit down with your team members and truly understand, what their working geniuses are, even if you're not using that model, what they're good at, what their goals are, and then how do you align them with the corporate culture, the corporate vision, the corporate activities. I think almost all of our team members came to our organization maybe falling under one bucket or one defined role. And as their skills developed and their interests developed, we've been very fortunate to be adaptable that, and, not perfectly, but in many cases, you're able to actually help grow the organization based on what their interest is.
Oh, that's great. So that leads me into our next blog, Taking Care of Your Social Wellness. Um, Talk to our audience about what this is. I know you didn't write the blog, but you are well versed on the topic of health and wellness in the workplace. So can you give us a little information on this?
Yeah, so social wellness is the concept and the idea of really being able to relate to your community, and how that shows up in your organization and what some key factors are in terms of actually being productive and relating to it. And I'm actually pulling up some stats right here. But it may show up in the form of volunteering, for example. So volunteering has shown to lead to a 9% increase in better mental health, 10% increase in better physical health, 8% increase in life satisfaction, 12% increase in social well-being, and then also decreasing depression as well. So we know that social wellness is a really key thing with our organizations right now. We know that there's higher instances of people feeling alone and depression. Coming out of the pandemic, though, many organizations have put a lot of tools and programs in place, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done as well.
Okay, so I know you went over a few things, but can you give our audience a few examples of how to take care of your social wellness? I know the blog lists quite a couple of things that you can do.
So, things that you can do obviously are reaching out to others within your own organization. Hopefully, if you have the ability within your organization to start different interest groups, employee resource groups, having gatherings. I am a huge believer that we can exist in this remote world and do it very, very well. I know that there are some naysayers that believe everybody needs to be in the office, but we have been virtual since 2001. And I believe that you have to be deliberate about creating your culture and social wellness, whether you are in person or whether you are virtual. It's a matter of putting the effort in and being deliberate about it. So there's employee resource groups, volunteering, looking for activities for the groups to come together when it makes sense to bring everybody together as well. Is there anything else in that blog, Janice, that pulled out that interests you we should talk about?
Maybe just calling a friend to catch up. I mean, working remotely, for me, I'm all by myself at my house. So for those that work remotely, maybe it's a disconnect from being in the office and having that water cooler, morning talk or catching up at the coffee machine, you know. So it's nice that we do have the teams that we can connect with each other and making sure our cameras are on so that we're not just hearing a voice, we're actually seeing each other. Which then leads me into my next topic of corporate mindfulness. I know you have a couple of webinars that you've hosted and talked on. We have those on our website, aoeteamwebinars.com. But there are a lot of stressors or influencers that can cause stress in the workplace, and how to take care of our own personal wellness should be an important topic. So my first question is, tell our audience what corporate mindfulness is.
So mindfulness is a process, a state, if you will, of being mindful about what you're doing. So for those of you that are listening that say, "Oh no, she's going into yoga teacher talk and getting real woo woo here," I can actually trace all this scientifically and also look at how our brain functions, and the importance of being very present and mindful about what you're doing applies to you not just in life but in a corporate setting. We know that if we are mindful about what we're doing, if we're not distracted, if we're not multitasking and doing 10 different things, we get a better output, we're less tired, we do a better job, we have better connections with those that we're working with. So that's what corporate mindfulness is. If you remember anything, it's just actually as simple as being mindful and deliberate about the task you have at hand. And our brains are typically thinking, 60% of our brain capacity is thinking about and actively like engage in the activities that we're not doing. So think about that. You're actually doing a task and maybe your brain is only 40% even engaged in what you're doing. Imagine if you were actually more engaged. Chances are you could do it faster, you could do it better, maybe even feel better about the whole process.
Right. Well, speaking of brains, in your webinar, Corporate Mindfulness, you talk about cleaning our brains. How does one do that?
So cleaning our brains is really key. The quick science and brain explanation, and I'm a geek about all this stuff about how our brain works, but you've probably heard that you can rewire your brain. So each night, our brains actually go through a process where we basically like clean and digest. So the thoughts that we access quite a bit, we create neurons, we create these patterns, and our brains actually create deeper grooves, if you will, which makes it easier to access these thoughts, these actions, even these skill sets, if you will. If you're a professional athlete, it's that continuing to practice those shots, etc. The way to clear it is actually to, our brains will come through and actually clear out what we don't access as much. There's a protein that actually gets labeled. It's called the C1q. So interestingly enough, if we are always accessing those negative thoughts, the negative self-talk and all that, we're actually creating stronger brain pathways to that versus the happier thoughts, the good self-talk, if you will. So that is really key in terms of cleaning it out.
So my next question is, what are the benefits of practicing mindfulness?
So the benefits are that, with practice, with time, you should be able to feel a little bit better about the tasks that you have at hand. So for example, even taking a pause, taking a moment before a stressful meeting, breathing, just kind of disconnecting yourself from your email. If you are in an office, taking a different walk towards the conference room and maybe looking outside for a minute and connecting with nature, even a couple of seconds, should put you in a better place coming into a meeting, coming into a stressful situation, and then learning to look at those cues. So for example, if you always have a stress response, if you get an email from a certain person before you've even opened it up, that's a symbol or a function of, hey, this is a stressful situation. So what can I do before I have that negative self-talk and create these narratives and stories? Can I try and pause for a moment?
Gotcha. So my last question is, how can the Working Genius model work with corporate mindfulness?
So the Working Genius model, again, gives us the opportunity to really look at where we find joy and then where we're exhausted or tired in the work that we do. So being mindful about what we do, we can't always work in our genius. We can't always work in our sweet spot, but being mindful about, hey, I need to work in this area that's maybe out of my genius. If it's an area that I know exhausts me, but maybe bucking it out, like, hey, I've got 2 hours where I'm just going to crank and really work on this part, and being very mindful about it. And then being careful of those distractions too. So if it's tasks that you don't excel at or aren't naturally a fit for, and you procrastinate and you're looking at your phone and you're doing these other things, all you're doing is dragging it out. So being very mindful and deliberate and trying to be just very focused on the thing at hand, maybe closing your email for a short period of time, etc.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk about corporate mindfulness, social wellness, and micromanaging. I think these are all important topics, and I think our audience will get value out of this. For those of you listening, you can view the blogs on our website at AOE Team Webinar or AOEteam.com under the blog tab. And then for the last one, the corporate mindfulness, you can view this webinar if you're interested on our webinar website, aoeteamwebinars.com. We thank you, Kimberly, for joining us today.
Thanks for the great discussion, Janice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this session provides value, and we hope you will join us for our next podcast.